Hello, this is Brent Reeves, and for this I'm going to call myself the Communications Tax Guy. This is a video that I'm putting together in response to a lot of questions that I'm getting almost on a daily basis. These questions are primarily coming from managed solutions providers, network solutions providers, interconnects, folks who see that their businesses are drastically, I don't want to say going away, but becoming reduced, and everything is shifting to the cloud. So these big networks that they used to support are all moving to the cloud. PBXs are now becoming hosted PBXs. Voice services are changing. They're being provided by the cloud and unified communication services. So a lot of these companies, as most entrepreneurs are, they're very adaptable. So they're going out there and they're saying, okay, I used to sell these types of solutions to hundreds of large companies who paid me for my expertise. So what's the next thing I can do to adapt to this? And a lot of them have chosen to become a voice provider. It makes sense. You're already selling things like or network solutions and communication solutions from a hardware perspective. So you might be selling Avaya products, you might be selling NEC products, ShoreTel products, things of that nature. And you're saying, okay, well, these same services now, these same companies are now offering unified communications products that I can then sell to the same customers that I have. Okay, well, what happens then? Well, what happens is you become a de facto service provider. So even though you're not the underlying carrier, you potentially could become the carrier of record. And what does that mean to you? Well, that could mean, and probably means, that now you're responsible for all the taxes. So federal communications taxes, state taxes, local 911 fees, special district taxes, all of those types of things are now your responsibility to collect and remit. So I wanted to go over a couple kind of key questions that are commonly asked of us, and that is twofold. What happens when I start selling communication services? Okay, and where is the demarcation line? What makes me a communications provider versus just a network or interconnect that is also providing you solutions? What makes me a communications provider? And there's really kind of, I want to say, two main factors. Number one, are you billing the client for the service? Are you billing the client, buying it potentially from, let's say you're buying a circuit from AT&T, or you're buying a VPN from AT&T or something of that nature, and then you're turning around and selling it to your client. Is that client getting a bill from you? Meaning, is it getting it from Fred's Interconnect or Fred's Network Management Solutions, or is that bill coming directly from AT&T? If the bill's coming from you, you're responsible for tax. Secondly, is there a markup on the service? Meaning, are you selling that product, you're buying it, say, wholesale from AT&T or Avaya or whoever you might be buying that product from? Are you marking it up and then reselling it to your customer? If you are, then you're a solutions provider, you're a services provider, and now you're responsible for taxes. Conversely, if you are selling that product to them as an agent, so meaning they're going to get a bill from AT&T, and maybe it's even included in your bill, but there's a bill from AT&T, all the funds are remitted to, and I'm using AT&T as an example, but all those funds are remitted back to your carrier, and then your carrier pays you a commission. In those cases, you may not be responsible for the tax. The tax may fall back in those cases to the carrier. But I want to just also say that, just to be sure, you want to talk to a local, your local communications tax professional to understand your business model and make sure you're doing it correctly. But that demarcation line, as I kind of put here, again, is twofold. Number one, are you selling the service as your labeled service? And number two, are you selling it as a marked up service rather than receiving an agency commission? If those are the cases, then you're responsible for the taxes. Conversely, what do I do about that? Well, the first thing you have to do is determine how you're going to actually provide those taxes to the customer. How are you going to calculate those taxes? How are you going to collect those taxes? And how are you going to remit those taxes? I'm going to go into that in more detail in another installment a little bit later on, but the purpose of today's video is I wanted to address one common misconception, one common question that I get, and that's, can I just pass through what my carrier charges me? Can I just take the bill that I get from my wholesaler who's providing me the service, I look at it, it's got tax on it, so I must be paying the taxes correctly. Can I just take those taxes, append them, and pass them through, collect them from my customer, pay them to my carrier, and make them responsible for the tax at that particular point in time? And the answer is really maybe, but mostly no is the answer. Okay, you've got three major challenges with that. First of all, there's gaps in price. You just have to assume there's a gap in price. Rarely do I see a customer buy something for $1, excuse my handwriting, and then sell it for $1. And that's the way the tax is computed. When you buy the product from your wholesaler, if you are paying tax, which you may or may not be paying the correct tax, you're paying it at this level. Okay? But let's say you mark that service up, which we would assume you are going to $1.50. Well, now you've got that 50 cents there that has no tax applied to it. Okay? So you say, well, I'll just take those rates and I'll just add it to the extra 50 cents that's there. That's not accurate, because there could be rules and regulations around how that tax is applied to that retail level versus the wholesale level. There could also be differences in the applicability of the rates themselves, and there could also be changes, such as breakpoints, tiers, things of that nature, that might impact the overall taxability of that 50 cents, to whereas the rate that you're paying here is not a one-to-one relationship with the rate that you may be charging here. Second thing is tax policy. There could be significant gaps in tax policy. Carriers, large carriers, are used to the audit situation. They have huge targets on their back. They've been through these audits. So typically these carriers, and large carriers especially, will take a very, very conservative approach in their taxation. You may or may not agree with that approach, and at the same time, you may or may not have to adopt that approach based on the product and service you offer. If there's one thing in communications that we all know, it's that there's black, there's white, and then there's huge gray right in the middle. So that's the area in which you can navigate. So you may not want to accept their tax policy. So if, let me erase this real quick. So let's say you're buying a solution from a wholesaler, and you're just adapting their tax policy. Well, you really don't have any insight into what that tax policy is. So you haven't actually looked at, okay, why are they charging these fees? What statutes are they referencing when they're charging these fees? Is there any gray area? Is there any changes that I can do? Not to mention the fact that more than likely you might be bundling those services with other products. Well, if you bundle those services with other products and then you go to resell that product within a bundle and you're just passing taxation policy on, that could be a problem, because it could impact the taxation of the rest of your bundle. So those are a couple things right there that you need to think about as opposed to just saying, well, I'm paying tax to the carrier, means I'm not liable. Lastly, well, probably not last, I've probably got a couple more things, but first and foremost, another item is responsibility. Ultimately, if you're the service provider, regardless of who the underlying carrier is, you're responsible for the tax. So an auditor does come knocking one day, and they will, and they say, okay, we want to understand your tax policy. And your tax policy is, well, I don't really have one, I just pass through whatever my carrier charges to me, and that's what I pay. They're going to look at you and say, okay, well, that's great. Your carrier may be compliant, but you may not be compliant. So I need to look at this, and ultimately, if there are any gaps, because your carrier is doing something wrong, believe me, they do, then it is your responsibility no matter what. So if it's your responsibility, then why not make it, something that's in your purview? Why not, go ahead and take the initiative and address that situation. And then the last thing is that I want to point out today anyway is there could be gaps in nexus. So depending on what product or service you sell, your underlying carrier may or may not have visibility into where your customer is. And in communications, where your customer is plays a major, major role in what the nexus determination is for the taxation purposes. So if they don't have visibility into the nexus of your end customer, then chances are the invoice that you're getting from your carrier is going to be based on potentially your nexus, but not the nexus of your customers. And even though you are paying taxes, and you're saying, well, I'm paying all of these taxes, you might be paying these taxes basically for nothing. So what we recommend, and what I would recommend, and what I hope you get away from this today is, it's a great business. You need to go into that business. You need to be a voice carrier. You're servicing these customers already. You're a trusted advisor. You're in there. You should be selling them these products. However, don't jeopardize your overall business that you've worked so hard to succeed by having some tax liabilities out there for communications when you're just adding lines of service. It doesn't make any sense. So I would strongly advise you reaching out to a communications tax professional if you're entering into that space. Hope this was informative. Tune in for our next installment when we talk about a little bit more about how we deal with these types of issues and what some of the options are out there for you as a communications provider.